Welcome to yet another episode of Shortcast Over Coffee. Today, my guest is Apar Gupta. Apar is a lawyer who serves as the executive director of the Internet Freedom Foundation, a non governmental organization that advocates for digital rights and liberties. In 2015, Apar and others launched SaveTheInternet.in, a public campaign that fought for net neutrality and stopped the introduction of Facebook's Free Basics initiative in India. Apar and his team at IFF file petitions and undertake advocacy campaigns to defend online freedom, privacy, and net neutrality. I have linked Apar's works in the show notes, so please do check them out. In this episode, I talked to him about his early exposure to technology, successful career as a lawyer, and his initiatives on net neutrality and other social causes. Please do like, share, and subscribe this channel as it will help us get such great guests on the show. And for all the audio files, do check out the episode Shortcast Over Coffee on top podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple, etc. Now, without further ado, let's dive right in. Hi,
Thank
Apar.
you.
Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, excited to be here.
Great. Apar, you are a lawyer uh, and you work in the field of technology. So
Yes,
tell me a bit about your background and what got you interested in technology in the first place.
I think Bala for any person, and I hope I can call you Bala since, even though we're talking for the first time. But I think a lot of these questions go towards our childhood. Okay, and I in India come from a very small set of people who are the metropolitan elite and who had early access to technology when they were growing up in the 90s. So it started out with actually the Atari console in which you could play Pong, okay, through those physical joysticks, okay. And then I saw my father have a pager, RPG pager, and go through all the Nokia cell phones as the models were released, which included the famous Matrix phone. You click and it pops out and makes a sound. And for me, it was reflected in terms of my parents' focus towards technology being provided to me as a component to my education. So it was instrumental in the goal of me doing better later in life. So we had a desktop at home, a compact Presario, I think so, yeah. And that got me really interested in terms of as an introvert, as much as I did, have a bunch of friends, but I was still an introvert in the sense that I liked spending time alone. So I started out just fiddling out with the computer. It started out with very basic things like reading out, the complete works of, like on Sherlock Holmes, or listening to music, or playing Prince 3D, or things like that. And then I started assembling computers for myself and my friends. And then I got into computer culture, which actually I think so is a very significant part of what I did later, because I started reading around technology. So I saved up pocket money. I purchased, I think so, Bill Gates' The Road Ahead. I read Data Quest. I subscribed to PC Quest. I used to read. So, and I was always approaching computing from the perspective of culture, where I used to like trivia around when were the first computers made, what is the Silicon Valley hacker culture, etc., things like that. And I did enroll in programming classes, but I didn't seem to have the interest or inclination. So I didn't do much of that. But what I did was I read around computing, and very, very deeply. And later on, when I go towards college, I start a blog around law and technology. I write on it very actively. And I say that, wow, like things are really picking up in terms of computing and technology. Maybe I've made the right choice. And lawyers, when they get into law school, they are always instructed you need to have a practice area eventually. You need to have a specialization. Okay, just like a doctor, right? And luckily for me, I picked up law and technology as something I wanted to do, which was matching my core interests. So that's what I ended up doing over a period of time. I ended up writing about it quite often because it's not like there was a lot of legal work around technology in India around 2002 or 2003. It must have been contracting or agreement based work in which you negotiate contracts, but it wasn't core to technology in a sense of policy, devising laws, making certain calls. So it developed over time, and at that point in time, what was important was for some person to understand how the legal relationship and governance of technology is working out. And here, I think so by just blogging every day or every week, and I accumulated about 300, 400 blog posts as a law student way back then as a blogger, really helped me out. So I think that's where it starts, the interest. And then, of course, a lot of other things add up in terms of my own personality being inclined towards reading and writing, uh, also in terms of public oration, those kind of interests which are much more skill based, kind of align with the thematic based interests which you hold and are cultured in from early age.
Hmm. Yeah, I was nodding when you said compact Presario because I could relate. That was also the first computer or first desktop at our home, and I still remember my dad getting it for 64,000 rupees in at around like 98, 97, 98 time, and it had like 2 GB of storage, and he took a loan for that for that computer, and I think he paid it off over a period of 4 years, I think, or probably more. Yeah. Interesting that you said you subscribe to magazines like Data Quest. I mean, they were not cheap, right? I would love to know what your parents did. Tell me more about them.
Okay. So I come from a business class background, and if you've seen those Bollywood movies in which they make fun of people who are from Delhi and who are wealthy, I'm one of them. Okay, I accept this, and we'll come to that a little later. How I've tried to
At a
become a
time
better
when
person.
at a time when a lot of privileged high class people are calling themselves middle class and they take a lot of pride in that. You
I'm
seem
not
to be
middle
an
class. I'm not at all. No, it's not also signaling any kind of virtue in the acknowledgement. It's the action which matters. Once you know, so the thing is, when you're growing up, you don't realize that. You think that, ha, sabhi ke paas hoga. Everyone will be like me only because you're a dumb kid, okay? And you're in that small bubble of people who have all of this. So I think I've been blessed by an accident of birth, by the genetic lottery in many ways. And I come from a business class family, loving parents, stable house in that sense. And my father has a great work ethic. And over a period of time, all of them do well. Okay. And post liberalization, there's acute exponential growth in the kind of wealth which is there. So people have had money for some period of time, but also consumption patterns, avenues towards market access, all of that changes. So I come from that, and I possibly am motivated also by my family, by my father, to say that you can do whatever you want. So he says it's not necessary you join the family business, which is in paper and pulp. Okay, I know a fair degree about GSM and like weightage and brightness, just by sitting around him and being around him and being trapped in a car with him when he goes to the factory, because he used to sit me also some days. But that's the thing. And in terms of my mother, I get a very good moral center in that sense, and I'm more attached to her in that way because she focuses on me. When I go back to my scrapbooks, I think, how can a person be so selfless and devoted? She's taken me for tabla, for sitar, for taekwondo. I'm a red black belt in taekwondo. I make the swimming team for the Delhi state. So it's a holistic kind of ideal kind of childhood, and that's also very peculiar for me. And I think it's when I talk to friends, they say you don't seem to have childhood trauma. I said that, wow, I feel like I missed out. And I'm joking, but here's the thing, you come from extreme amounts of economic privilege, and you come from extreme amounts of emotional comfort, and that kind of shapes me. And I'm just so grateful towards that. I would love to say that things were always this ideal. They were not. They used to get really anxious around the board exam. So there was a lot of scholastic pressure on me to do well, right? And I was not the conventional good student. In all my report cards, it's above average. Okay, potential to do more. Okay, but for some reason, I didn't really enjoy classes in school as much as my school was also. I have fond memories of that, but it's just that I'm not the conventional person in terms of being a school prefect or a head boy, but I end up being the president of 4 clubs. Okay, so I'm that kind of person. And in India, especially in certain cities, especially like Delhi and Bombay, there are many people like me. And what's unfortunate, I've noticed, is that a lot of people who have been privileged economically and socially in India are no longer here. They have left the country for good. I'm still here, and possibly that's my commitment to my work. And but just to circle back is that I acknowledge all my privilege, and I've done it consistently over years, because only when you start acknowledging it publicly, others can question you, demand better, and you yourself can think that, yes, maybe everyone's not like me, right? It's not to put things in another person's face. It's to essentially acknowledge that now that you have all of this, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, that is more important. I feel like privilege, like you said, lottery, just because you were born in a certain family or a certain strata of society, is one thing, and what you do with it and what you do out of it is a lot more important. And I just want to take you back to something that you said is, you had very early interest in technology. You did
Yes.
subscribe to magazine, you did use a lot of the products, and the common question would be that, hey, why did you not become a computer scientist or a research scientist? And people sometimes forget that just because someone likes it need not mean that they are okay in learning all the aspects of it, right? Like a common example that I say among my friends is on cricket, is that, if someone loves cricket, they should also love running around the ground. They should also love the training. They should also love fielding and all that aspect. And someone who loves technology need not automatically mean that they like coding, or they will eventually go on to become a computer scientist. So that is also quite fascinating. And
And Bala, I think it's become much more important and tangible now, because technology is having a social impact. Okay, so for the people who may be tinkerers around and inside technology, sometimes it's great when they think about social impact. In fact, it's excellent, because they have a sound technical understanding, and possibly their sociological understanding, or the way it impacts people is also well developed, beyond them being users, or in terms of a commercial market. It's important, and what you're seeing right now. But sometimes people can also start from understanding the impact technology is having on people, and then come towards understanding the mechanics and the smaller widgets of how it works, right? And here, quite often, the learning which comes through, for instance, if you look at gig work, from the people who are actually doing the gig work, right? What technology impact it's having on them, and then going back to how possibly certain economic decisions, which then determine the technical design, have been taken.
mm, that is so true. And by the way, to your point about using a lot of tech products, are you a fan of retro tech? Like, for instance, do you get excited when you see like Apple Mac 2 or something? Are you one of those?
Not really. But I have saved some of my older dumb phones, just like to call them feature phones. Sorry for calling them dumb phones. Apologies to the hurt feelings of Nokia, Siemens, and Sony Ericsson.
Mm.
Okay, so yeah, I do keep them. I was a prolific user of the BlackBerry. I've not saved that one, but I have a drawer in which I've saved my old phones. So I do keep some bits here and there, and also my early generation MP3 players. I had a iRiver, which was one of the first MP3 players in the world, and uh, Discman. I've not been, but I save my devices. I keep them in a drawer. I save them.
Yeah, the reason why I said it is because I live in the Bay Area, and there is this computer history museum, and if you ever visit, you should check it out. It's awesome for those enthusiasts who love retro tech. So yeah, a bit of a sidetrack, but yeah, again, coming back to technology policy and regulations in general. 1990s was a time when tech really exploded. There was a significant growth in I mean, there was the dot-com bubble, and then there was the whole Microsoft antitrust and all of that. So sometimes what happens is the tech grows too fast, and then the regulations don't quite catch up, and that happened in the US in the late 90s and 2000s. What happened in India? Would you like to walk through some of the significant um, policy changes that happened in India in this space?
So I think what happens in India is that what people. So I'm actually uh, I've transitioned from IFF of about a few months ago, and I'm still volunteering, but it's decreasing as months go back. The organization becomes truly independent. And one of the things I'm doing in my time is now to write a book around the past 20 years around technology policy. And the deeper I get into it, I discover, Bala, that the steps towards how technology really just explodes as a consumer device in terms of our assimilation is not only a global force in terms of the internet becoming what it does through the Netscape browser, etc. There are roots which are very deep in India as well with respect to how technology is deployed. And people may find it strange, but I'll give references. It starts with Indira Gandhi and her electronics policy. So if you go to Dinesh Sharma's book, The Outsourcer, you'll be able to look at how that policy is baked. Then, of course, after assassination, Rajiv Gandhi comes in. And there are great articles. There's one in the New York Times. I'll send it across. People should read it. It's in terms of how firms as well as government is starting to use technology. And in fact, Rajiv is being criticized by the opposition for setting up a cabinet of what is called as computer boys. And there are large protests happening in India due to a fear of job loss due to automation. And it's interesting when you look at it that there's also focus in one of the first policies which are serving electronics on internet penetration, setting up public networks. People need to remember that Sam Pitroda comes in. He devises a new switching network which works in India, technically at lower temperatures in higher dust conditions, which removes the kind of large European tech which is deployed. So it's indigenous, and a public switching technology then allows the internet to penetrate, wait times to decrease, etc., etc. And what happens is that over this period of time, as telecom licensing is happening and it's being deregulated from the state firms towards the private firms, the internet starts moving. But the roots of this policy, I'd like to say very, very clearly, even are there pre-liberalization, pre-1991. But I think so a greater confidence is reposed in them after that. And when you look at possibly 1998, from the tech policy perspective, that's a important year because I think after a rapid succession of governments and incomplete mandates, Atal Bihari Vajpayee finally becomes prime minister for a longer term period of time. Okay, Pramod Mahajan, who's essentially described as a technocrat politician, in the first term, he ruffles some feathers, etc., because they're trying to stitch together the mandate, but becomes the first Minister of Information Technology. Okay, a ministry is made, okay, for the first time. And he brings in a law which is called the Information Technology Bill. It's referred to a parliamentary standing committee, and then it's debated in parliament. And if you go through the debates in parliament, most parties, including the Congress party, supports the bill. It's a cross-partisan support. And the core feature of the bill is that, okay, now you have these international contracts which are being entered quite often by electronic means, and you need to give legal sanctity in Indian law under the law of contracts to electronic contracts, to digital signatures, and you also need to implement it in governance. So essentially, the interests which are there are in two large buckets at that point in time. The first is towards encouragement of the private sector and economic activity, and the second is towards welfare and governance. And this is recognized across the political spectrum at that point in time. It's really interesting to see that technology has at its root been recognized in India as one of the essential components across political parties and across the spectrum to fulfilling the ambitions of social justice.
Wow, I didn't know. I didn't know that it went all the way back to Indira Gandhi, and
It does.
yeah, and
He wasn't
Rajiv.
able to.
Go ahead.
No, anyways, I'm interrupting.
No, and I remember visiting Rajiv Gandhi's residence once, or I think it was Indira Gandhi's residence, one of those. And I remember seeing an old laptop of Rajiv Gandhi, and I was told that Rajiv Gandhi really wanted to, wanted India to go ahead with the technology embracement that was happening in the West, and he wanted to go faster than a lot of people at the time. And you mentioned Sam Pitroda and all those people.
Shadri, there are a lot of people actually who are associated with it, and um, it even goes further back. If you think about the IITs or the IIMs, how they have been set up. I went to the IIM archives, Bala and I discovered that, even the logo for IIM as it's designed first starts out as a derivation of the MIT logo. If you look at the drawing, and then comes towards the Jali work of which is there in Ahmedabad. So it's much more localized. Or if you look at the IITs, the first IITs, they are model of the MIT, and Ross Barrett has written a tremendous book called The Technological Indian, in which the first few Indians go to MIT and what are the influences they bring back to India, right? And it's really at its root a firm belief, I think so. For some reason, I don't know, of a lot of people who stay in India, that technology is going to be something which is going to make their life and the lives of a shared community much better.
Wow, yeah, really looking forward to the book whenever it comes out.
I'm able to complete it soon.
I'm sure you will. Well, Apar, we spoke right before the episode about the John Oliver episode on net neutrality.
Yeah.
And just for the listeners, a statement on net neutrality. So net neutrality is the principle that internet service providers should enable access to all content and applications, regardless of the source, without favoring or blocking particular products or websites. And I just wanted to ask you, what made you start thinking and talking about net neutrality?
So, when you're a blogger, right, and this will be relatable to everyone now, because everyone's in the influencer economy, you try to maintain a schedule of writing. And I think one of the first times I wrote about net neutrality was because it was a debate which was going on in the United States. So I used to write about topical issues on my blog every week, right? And my own take on law and policy. So you notice this issue which is happening in the United States around how your telecom service provider or your ISP cannot determine the conditions under which you access a web resource, such as a website or an app. So they can't charge you more money because you choose to go to www.flipkart.com rather than www. let's say Myntra.com or Amazon.com or any other shopping portal. They can't also make Flipkart load faster than Amazon. Okay. And here at its root is an economic incentive for internet service providers to what is called as double dip, basically charge you for the amount of data you're accessing. So earlier there used to be essentially packages around 500 MB, 100 MB. It's still there, but it's notional, right? You're paying a flat monthly rate and you're paying for speed now rather than the amount of data which you consume. Okay, but back then it was about the amount of data you accessed, and they charged you more on top of that, and it was not that cheap back then, right? And in addition to that, the telecom service providers are your internet service providers. They are in a very bad habit in being a regulated industry in which not a lot of people can start a telecom company tomorrow. And it's in the nature of regulated businesses, given that there are high entry barriers to double dip, to discover multiple sources of revenue. Even small businesses do it, but regulatory businesses are a little much more audacious. So they want to double dip. They want to charge Flipkart or Amazon, and they want to charge you at the same time. Now, think about it from the perspective that the internet, as much as it is today, let's say a bouquet of about 10 sites or like 4 CDNs and like, three web hosting providers or in-house capability to run servers, etc., which capture the majority of the traffic. The promise of the internet is that Apar can start his own blog and it will load at the same point in time much faster, let's say, than when it's hosted on any other web service provider. Like, I know there are problems right now with CDNs, etc., but just imagine. And here, one of the bottlenecks may be that your telecom or internet service provider may say that, hey, you're going to Apar's blog, okay? So you need to pay about 10 rupees more and it'll be added to your bill and we'll tell it to you, or we'll load the website a little slower because Apar is not paying us. So net neutrality at its principle is preserving the user's autonomy to access the internet and thereby improve media diversity, which at its root is linked to the fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression, which includes within itself the fundamental right to receive information. We form our opinions, our thoughts on the basis of what we read, what we see. And of course, if there are barriers to accessing that, it's going to shape the media ecology, which is going to only favor large firms. It's already happening right now, but it's going to happen much more often, right? People are just not going to visit websites beyond social media and app providers as much as people do still do it today. Or startups will have a problem in which they won't be able to compete with larger companies because they can't pay the same amount of money another provider is paying your ISP. Okay, so it's going to set up really perverse incentives in that way. So in 2015, in the Telecom Regulatory Authority came out with a consultation paper on net neutrality and OTT services, and that's when it peaked. So the first thing we saw was in the United States, this conversation was going on already. In India, the conversation started with what is called as a consultation paper, which is put out by the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. And it's basically saying that this is an area we are looking to regulate. These are basically our presumptive views on the basis of surveying the domain. And these are certain questions which you need to answer on the basis of the survey we've done. And the questions they were posing was that because people have started using internet-based messaging more than SMS, there is a revenue loss which is being caused to telecom service providers, which will pay the license fee. And because their revenues are being impacted, should internet-based messaging as well as online video conferencing, which is happening at Skype at that point, pay money to your telecom service provider? Or should you be charged extra? And in addition to that, they also said that should we license things like online gaming because it's leading to young people in India being impacted negatively in terms of their scholastic goals, in terms of their larger development. And it's really paternalistic, yeah, Bala. So I started screenshotting that and posting it on Twitter. I've been an early user of Twitter. I think I signed up in 2009, then I re-signed up in 2010 and became more active. And there was this Another person, Nikhil Pava, he's quite well known in India for commenting on tech policy. He runs the Media Nama online portal. He's a journalist, he's a commentator on technology, and he was screenshotting it as well. Okay. And he essentially saw that both of us were talking about the same thing, and both of us had the opinion, and pardon my English for saying it's crap. Okay. Like what the hell, these questions shouldn't even be asked, right? Should he license gaming, okay, and then make like age gating, etc. systems? Why is the government getting into this kind of control? And you need to remember, this is 2015. This is not 2023. Those are very different times. Okay. The world seemed to be a kinder, gentler place. And we thought the internet had a very different direction, and technology would be essentially, is at that point in time, technology skepticism had started, but still the belief was that access to the internet is going to deepen uh, the democratic processes, or it's going to result in free expression, etc., automatically to some extent. Very, very mistaken, idealistic views. So essentially, he had seen the John Oliver video. He took leadership, and I'm a little much more introverted, at least at that time, in terms of I'm a much more practicing lawyer, going to courts, commenting on policy. We'll send a submission. He has a thought process in which he's seen the video for John Oliver, and he says that we need to replicate this campaign in India. This is the same issue. Let's do it. And he comes up with an idea in which he says we need the tech, so people need to email TRAI and send in their public comments. We need people who can excite the public and communicate it. So we need stand-up comics, and we need policy experts who understand regulatory design, such as you, Apar, and can also know what's the TRAI, how do we talk to them. Okay. So this is how the campaign starts. And we meet in, yes, again, a very elite thing, which also is a failing of internet movements, is in Amici Khan Market. In the morning, I think possibly on a Saturday, just like today, we have a coffee, and coffee has this weird power of making you feel, like a superhuman in terms of your abilities of realizing really audacious goals when you're scribbling them down. And sometimes they come true. So this is how it was launched. And right after that, because I knew a lot of stand-up comics, he knew a lot of stand-up comics, I used to do content clearance for them. At that time, there were still political jokes which are being made more frequently than today. And I used to say, oh no, this is going a little too far. You may get into trouble. Not like today where everything gets people into trouble. And he knew them also due through his social networks. So they make the script, we set up the platform. Prior to that, I write up an expert submission. I'm going to send it to you. I dug it up recently, in which I pull in statistics, a survey of economic literature, regulatory literature, and under each question, there are about a long list of, there's first a short answer and then a long list of reasons why a lot of the questions itself, which are being framed, are incorrect and are being asked by the TRAI. But an expert sending a submission by itself doesn't move things. It's the power of organized community which sends a response. And this is what ends up happening with the Save the Internet movement.
Wow. I mean, it's fascinating how a movement in the US and an episode of a show really inspires people so many miles away, right? Uh, yeah. Uh, you know, it's interesting that you brought up or explained the net neutrality in detail. And here in the US, what is fascinating, or well, I wouldn't say fascinating, but I would say frustrating rather, is that there are three companies that take care of almost 90 or 99% of internet service providing in the US. There is Comcast, which is Xfinity, then there is Spectrum, and then there is Cox Wi-Fi. And according to experts, America has one of the slowest internet in all of the developing world, and I think South Korea has the fastest. And these three companies have started to sort of operate as a cartel here. And I have not been in India for a long time other than vacation, so I don't know the ISP situation in India. Is it something similar?
So the speeds are crap, yeah. So most people access the internet through mobile internet. We get the 4G sign, but we're not getting full 4G. So, and there's a market oligopoly which has been formed in India as well after the entry of Reliance Jio, but the prices are truly the lowest in the world. So price per GB is lowest, but somehow you're compromising in terms of service quality in sometimes in I would say that even the network density and coverage is not that poor. Of course, it's really bad when you go outside from high population density zones where there's a lesser incentive for the telecom operator to, install, stations for. But I would say in India, cost is the primary policy objective, which is to ensure that people can access audiovisual content at prices which don't hurt their pocket in that sense. So, Bala, here people are given a 5 GB pack when you purchase a 10 rupee pack of chips. So,
Yeah.
that's how things work.
Yeah, I think Geo has revolutionized like crazy, and India has always been a price-sensitive market, and obviously for the right reasons. So I think providing accessibility is more important than a lot of other
Yes.
things.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about. I mean, this also may be a bit of a digression, but you know, in the olden days, not everybody got access to education. Only the rich and the privileged did. Same with healthcare, and now we are living at a time when healthcare and education is a right. We have right to education. Similarly, should internet also be a right? Are we
Without
getting
question.
there?
Without question.
What is your point? Yeah.
Without question, this if the state can do it as per financial capacity, it needs to provide a smartphone to every person and access to the internet, and then invest also in digital literacy to make sure that the critical faculties of a person is developed. I think I just would like to look a little much more internally in terms of what I've been able to do, and none of it would have been possible without the internet. The person who's on the Zoom call and sitting here, which people are listening, has been shaped by the internet, by my early access to the internet. And here, I think it gives a person not only the ability of achieving really instrumental or tangible goals which are valued by society as denominators of success, such as getting a job or making so much money or having these certifications or signing up for the Coursera course, etc., etc. It's not that. It's the development of your personality. It's how you can make long-term friendships, find mentors, discover idols, have influences in your life. I think it's really important. It's one of the core resources which allows, firstly, instrumental goals, which are social mobility, economic participation. It quite often is also necessary in a society like India, which is deeply patriarchal and caste driven. It allows you to break a lot of those things for people who lack power, the ability to organize. And here, I think so, just in terms of smartphone ownership itself, it's still very restricted to the metropolitan areas, or it's there's a gatekeeping which happens in most families, which are the majority in India, in the lower income groups, in which the person who's the man in that family has one device through which the entire family then accesses it. And quite often, even the scale of digitization in which citizen to government interaction quite often is through smartphone devices. It makes, the children not able to access the internet that much more likely, for women's autonomy again to be restricted, etc., etc. So I think it's not going to magically result in individual welfare in our social goals being achieved, but it is a very important component of it. And around that, we need to build a lot of policy. So if the state is able to do that, and here I disagree with a lot of friends, because I believe in the role of the state much more heavily than others do.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few movements. I think it was Negroponte from MIT, who had this one Chromebook per child, initiative and so on. Is there something from the state, from the government, to sort of enable everybody to move towards digitization and embrace laptops or smartphones and so on?
Yes, it's there. So state governments do provide digital devices. They do provide access to the internet in some states in India. There are those programs happening, but I think it needs to be rolled out nationally. Um, Unfortunately, India, even internet access is not there across the entire country, just like the United States. Let me mention, even a rich country doesn't have access in areas in which there's a low population density or people are staying. So in India, it's also due to economic reasons. People may be staying there, but they may not be able to afford commercial internet access. So the government does have this system, which is called the Universal Service Obligation Fund, which is similar to the United States, in which they take a little much of the profits and from the revenues of the telecom companies, which are the internet service providers in India, and then create this network infrastructure. Because without that infrastructure, it doesn't matter if you have the devices or you have the money or the state gives you, is the backbone is absent, right? So last mile connectivity is incredibly important. In fact, in the pandemic, backbone connectivity in Andaman and Nicobar was so bad that young people had to shift out from there to conduct remote work. And we, in fact, when I was at IFF, we organized an entire petition campaign to the Ministry of Communication saying that, okay, you only have the state provider providing internet access, but it is priced so unreasonably and it's so slow that young people can't participate, can't conduct remote work. So I think those problems are also there. It is a complex issue, but what I am happy about is that irrespective of the political party which is in power, okay, internet access and connectivity has been across the political spectrum being acknowledged as a social goal. So it can be the Congress, the BJP, the left parties, etc. All of them recognize that internet access is essential for human development, and they aim towards it. Of course, there are very different approaches what they undertake under it.
Hmm. Yeah, that is a very interesting point. Apart, let's now move to digital personal data protection bill.
Yeah.
I just want to dive a little deep. A fairly recent bill. And one of the criticism about the bill is that it imposes duties and penalties on individuals, unlike a lot of data protection laws elsewhere. And it also has extensive exemptions for government and private companies from consent and compliance provisions. Um, have there been any issues regarding personal data protection in India? I know of the Pegasus fiasco, and how important is this bill, and how do you see the pros and cons of this bill?
Bala, the story of data protection in India is actually emerging from the National Biometric and the Aadhaar-based authentication, which is essentially through your iris or thumb scan, is the primary method which the state devised for providing rations and entitlements to people. And a large number of Indians, in fact, I would say close to a majority, draw some kind of benefit, pension, entitlement. And given the burden it I won't say burden, but the amount of financial resources it requires from the state and the central budgets. About 15 years ago, I would say that there was thinking which was evolving that we need to check leakages. We need to ensure that the correct beneficiary is getting the pension or the rations which they're entitled to. Okay. And they came up with biometric based authentication in which is called the Aadhaar program, because they said that for people to have a smart card or for people to do authentication in any other way would be inconvenient. And it's a unique signifier for a person to have a thumbprint or iris scan. And we'll make this technology in India. So Aadhaar essentially did not have any legal basis. So it wasn't created through an act of parliament. So it didn't have a very defined purpose that the law says that you can only do this. And it also then has safeguards, it has a governance mechanism. Those things were absent. And a challenge to the program also was premised on people who come from working with a lot of the beneficiary groups said that these people already lack power. The technology is highly probabilistic in nature. Sometimes thumbprints don't match. Sometimes there are practical problems because if it's a person who's engaged in manual work, their thumbprints may wear off. You're not accounting for a lot of that. It results in exclusion for the most vulnerable who basically want access to cooking fuel, rice, and pulses, which is necessary for their monthly sustenance, right? It may be an old widow who has cataract, okay, who may not be able to. So there was a challenge both to the program as well as the lack of safeguards. And a lot of these objections also emerged from the state being able to get to know when the authentication was made and then its integration into not only beneficiary entitlements, but all kinds of services, even in the private sector. Every time you take a telephone connection, every time you open a bank account. So Aadhaar became a form of identification, which is also used for not only ensuring that beneficiaries in the welfare state are obtaining their entitlements, but it becomes a centralized authentication system in a way, right? And of course, there are efficiencies which people look at, but let's look at the flip side. It creates a massive amount of metadata in which a person's activities can be cataloged around a whole range of functions, both in the public and the private sector, which are going to a server. And at least the metadata is telling you the time and the person and the kind of activity, right? So at its root, let's use the word. It's a surveillance state, right? And if you don't have a law, you don't have safeguards, what is there? So I'm part of a legal case in the Supreme Court which challenges it. The government says, well, the Constitution of India does not have any written text which says you have a fundamental right to privacy. And there is the past cases which have been there don't clearly spell that out, because sometimes the court has said there's no fundamental right to privacy. And then in later cases, it said that there's a fundamental right to privacy, but it didn't clearly reason how it came and disagreed with its earlier decision. And even when it disagreed with its earlier decision, the number of judges who held that privacy is a fundamental right was a little smaller than what it held before. So there's some dispute, and we don't think so. Privacy is a fundamental right. So that leads to the decision of the Supreme Court in the case Puttaswamy judgment, which in 2017 says that there's a fundamental right to privacy, which is linked to all your fundamental rights, which means privacy is a little much more broader. It's your freedom to wear the kind of clothes you want, to eat what you want, to be friends with who you want, to choose your spouse, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of their caste, etc., etc. A whole set of freedoms which are tied in with philosophical concepts of autonomy, liberty, dignity, right? It's at the core of a human being. And it's much broader. Your sexuality, your etc., etc., your gender identity. And one subset is informational privacy. And that becomes important when you look at digitization, because the more a person knows about you or an entity knows about you, the more they are able to direct your behavior, control and command it, influence it, or hold a direct sort of power over you through the act of surveillance. And here the court says you need to make a data protection act, because privacy is not only a doctrine which is prescribing what the government can't do. It is also obligation cast on government to protect that right in the private sector and the public sector by saying that we'll have a regulatory body. These are certain statutory protections, because each time a privacy violation happens, a person shouldn't come to court. It should also be a proactive legislative basis to it. Quite often, comparisons are made to the Europe's GDPR, which is today known as the pop-up cookie law, to the annoyance of many people, but it also has its benefits. We can talk about that also a little later. But essentially, a process has been already it's actually 15 years. India has been in different committees thinking about a data protection law, but this decision really gives the kick, okay, that you need to make it soon. Okay, and here the first choice which is made is to omit surveillance, which means that whenever another person, quite often an intelligence agency state gathers personal information about you without your knowledge, because they're surveilling you, right? And surveillance cannot be done after a person has been put to knowledge conventionally, because they change their pattern of behavior. If you know that you're being surveilled by the government and it's not a mass surveillance system and a totalitarian state, you will stop doing certain things, right? So usually surveillance is done by intelligence agencies for national security purposes. and that's left outside the ambit of this law. They say we'll only look at data protection in which information which is personal is gathered through consent, okay, in which we put the other person to knowledge, and then we tell them why we are gathering this information, how it's tied to a purpose, and how will we use it, when will we delete it, what you can modify, etc., etc. So essentially the thinking is you need to make a law, and here the digital data the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, it's not a bill, it's a law now, is proposed after a series of deliberations, and it doesn't pick up from the earlier deliberations. It's a completely fresh text. So it drops the 15 years of thinking. It does not reflect the thinking under the K.S. Puttoswamy judgment. And as I've written in the book, it's essentially bringing a lot of state control in determining how the law will be applied and how it will not be applied, to whom it will be applied, and whom it will not be applied. So in a lot of ways, it's legitimizing government control on itself and the private sector, whereas the basis of the privacy judgment was to give greater control to the individual, to the ordinary Indian, because you need to equalize the imbalance and asymmetry in power between the individual and a corporate entity or the public sector through a law. The law is not the basis of crystallizing the status quo where the individual data is gathered without them having a meaningful choice, restraint, and safeguard and remedy if there's a breach. But it is essentially a law which unfortunately goes in the other direction. And I've written an op-ed on this in the Hindu. I hope people are able to read it. I'll send you a link in which I reason that there are different provisions of the law and why it's very, very problematic. But quite just two or three short points from it. The first is that if you look at the law is having a central objective of promotion of gathering of personal data, which is why it also exempts any data which you have made public from the ambit of the law, which means if you have posted anything on social media, which is considered by the law as a public disclosure of personal information, which is a picture, any kind of status, any kind of tweet, that can be scraped. And that was called the AI exemption. Now, think about how that can be used to make synthetic media, which is having an intent to deceive, such as a deepfake, right? So you're not protected by data protection because the policy choice which has been made is that we need to create large models or large sets of training data on the basis of scraping the internet, right? So it's outside the ambit of personal data protection, right? The second is that if you look at the rights which are given there, the rights are all limited, okay? Of course, you have consent, but there's also an exemption clause which is there, which says that for certain other purposes which are considered legitimate by the government, it's exempt, okay? The third is their duties cast on people, okay, like you and me, that we have to provide a complete information to every data fiduciary, any person who's gathering data, which ties in with our government identity. Now, think about how women in India quite often don't provide their complete details because of safety reasons, right? It puts them in peril, right? And of course, it's again going against the choice of privacy. If you have to reveal your full name as per a government document to every person who's asking for it. Finally, the exemptions are not only exemptions for, let's say, certain well-defined purposes. They say that as per type and purpose of data, the government can exempt, guess what? Not a group of companies, but one single company or one single government department. And not with respect to activity, but the entity itself. So I can go on and on about why I think it's a very, very poor law. But I'd just like to say that it undermines the promise of individual privacy, which is essentially towards making sure that safeguards are there for ordinary Indians when their data is being gathered by the private and the public sector.
So the works for this bill/law now started in around 2022 is when it was first introduced in the.
So it's a long journey. So it starts actually with the Department of Personnel and Training, which was forming what was called a privacy law during the UPA 2 period. Okay, in 2011-12. Then there was the Justice AP Shah committee. I've written an op-ed on this again in the HT, just drawing out its history. But here's the thing, Bala, in 2022-ish or three, this year itself, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology disregards everything which has happened before and comes out with a completely new proposal and says that, look, this law is so simple, it's easy to understand. Okay. And we've drafted it in a way in which it's gender sensitive because we've used the female pronoun. They actually say this. Okay. And everyone is just aghast, and the people who are supporting it only support it for the purpose in saying that, wow, it's so simple to understand. But if you look at the details, law, just like coding, uses phrases as terms of art. If you use a certain call function in coding, it means something, right? It results in a certain output. In the same way, if you use a certain phrase in law, it means something. It then determines how a court will decide, how the law will be executed and implemented. And here, you can use simplicity and plain English in drafting, but if the plain English itself is saying that, as may be prescribed by the central government, okay, at 38 instances in the law without giving any kind of anchoring criteria, if you say the central government can exempt any entity from the private or the public sector as to the type and size of personal data as may be prescribed. Of course, it's easy to understand, but it means the government can do anything that it wants. There's no limitation which is placed in terms of its power. So it's been a long history of the law, but I would like to say that, to use a Latin phrase, in 2023, this version of the law which has been passed, this version of the proposal of a data protection bill which has been passed into law is completely tabula rasa. It's from a clean slate in many ways.
Wow. And you also mentioned about deep fake, and we all saw what happened with the whole Rashmika Mandana deep fake. Has the explosion of AI suddenly in the year 2023 make it a lot more complicated? I'm sure it did. And the entire thing needs to be changed. Do you think so?
I I think the if you have the right principles in law in terms of how you are thinking about power relationships, who doesn't have power in society, who needs power, what are the processes for effecting remedy, a lot of your problems, irrespective of how technology is deployed, can be addressed incrementally over a period of time. Think about it from the perspective of when laws were drafted earlier, in which theft of movable property over a period of time came to also include within it an understanding that movable property can also be intangible. It doesn't need to be a bullock cart or a car. It can also be electricity, which is not fixed, right? So it doesn't need to be corporeal in that sense, right? So I think if you have the right principles when you frame laws, then through notifications which come through at latter points in time, you can take it into account. It can be done. But what we are actually faced with today is very, very bad laws, in the sense that, not that they don't understand technology. That's not the problem. The problem is that the policymakers in India, I would say specifically the union government, if you look at all the proposals, if you look at the Digital Data Protection Act, which is a law now, if you look at the telecom bill, which is to overhaul what was the Telegraph Act, it's essentially having the same colonial features of Her Majesty being replaced by the union government in terms of a lot of state prerogative and licensing, which is then coming to the internet. Or the most recent proposal, which has come through the broadcasting bill, in which the government of India wants YouTubers who comment on news and current affairs to register with it, and also is getting into content, a four-tiered content appraisal process for OTT streaming platforms. And people in the United States will find it strange, but the government wants to basically censor what is shown on Netflix, Amazon Prime, Geo Hotstar, etc., those OTT streaming platforms. And its reasoning is that, well, we censor it for cable television, which has 200 channels, and you can't decide what is shown. The broadcaster decides it. So let us also decide what's shown on the internet through your favorite streaming app. So if you look at all of these proposals, what's coming through, and I think it's a symptom of a high amount of concentration of centralization of power in choosing what technology should be, what technology should not be, is towards the union government wanting to say that this is the path technology and its use and its social development in India should follow. And unfortunately, it's quite often bundled not with the objectives of governance which flow from the Constitution of India. It flows from objectives of political interest in terms of expansion of power or certain ideological objectives which are there. And it's also because a lot of the implementations under all of these laws are not through regulatory bodies. Regulatory bodies essentially are also necessary, even when they're imperfect, to build a division in terms of the enforcement not coming from a government minister, okay, in which there are a set of technocrats, bureaucrats, people from civil society, if you choose it well, who can then devise what are the implementation mechanisms, and can also, to a certain degree, steer the private sector and the public sector towards what has been a principle agreed to in Parliament. It's not happening under these proposals. The union government is retaining the power at the ministerial level, which means that the cabinet minister who's meeting a company head and telling them invest in India is also saying you shouldn't show this. Is the same person who's so there's a. I'm not saying that there's abuse of power or corruption. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that by design itself, there's an inherent conflict of interest. Okay, and quite often in India, you need to build institutions around technology which can ensure its governance, both on understanding the technology but also following the right principles of governance, right? Where the objective is to make sure that the technology sector grows in India, right? So there's innovation, better products, services, customer delight is there. More people are able to access it, right? It's there's a democratic function to that, and people also have the ability of remedy, of complaint, of ensuring that they have a sense of power which is equalized. That's not happening here right now.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, when OTTs came in, some of the directors were jumping in joy, saying that, hey,
Yeah.
there is finally this platform where we can express ourselves. But now with uh, with a
So if you
move to
look at the
Hmm,
if you
yeah.
look at the popular shows such as Four Shots Only, it has about four young Indian women who are choosing their lives not as per very prevalent social stereotypes and values in India. They're single, they're dating, they are having great careers, and the director actually says, we couldn't have made this for cable television. We found the audience, we found a format, we found the ability to do it, because here the women are making a choice in terms of their romantic and sexual partners. And or you look at Mirzapur, right, which has coarse language, but then Indians do use coarse language, right, in day to day. So it's refreshing when you see that. So there's a waltz. I think there's a Washington Post story recently that some shows have been dropped, Bala, and it's really disappointing now.
Yeah, it is. And someone like an Anurag Kashyap was jumping in joy, and be like, hey, finally there is this platform, and now it's going to be RIP creative freedom and creative artistic expression. So, yeah, I hope it never happens, but seems like it will eventually. It's not a matter
It
of
was
if, but when.
so.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, Bala. I want to give people a sense of um, realistic optimism, right? Very pragmatic things, sense that things
Right.
will improve. And here I think that my own personal thinking around this from reading history has been that when you have a state which becomes very, very powerful, especially in a diverse country like India, and if you go to Tamil Nadu and Kerala, you'll recognize how diverse India actually, or the Northeast, how diverse you actually are. And you have a central administrator and a force which tries to bring more and more power to determine this should be there and this should not be there. It can only be done till some point in time. And I don't know when the race to the bottom ends and we start a journey towards much more aspirational, idealistic conception of Indian society. But we've gone through those periods in time. It's not
Yeah.
like it's not there for India. Now, in terms of content restriction, etc., I especially feel that if its enforcement happens in a way which is too restrictive, there'll be economic cost to it as well, which is what is coming out that India, which has Bollywood, should actually be and is miles ahead of the South Korean creative industries, if you look at it, right? The K-pop dramas. So if you essentially say that these are things you can make and these are things you can't make, we will also lose out on a huge amount of economic opportunity in terms of Indian creative industry, but also soft power, as Shashi Tharoor has quite often written that Bollywood.
I was about to say, because of this whole K-pop and K-drama, there are people trying to learn South Korean, even wanting to use their products and so on. So, like you rightly mentioned, South Korea is quite flexing its soft power. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and I think there's no better place in the world than India in terms of. I'm sorry, I was talking like a nationalist, but really, in terms of our art, in terms of our culture, we are so blessed. In terms of our food, we are so tremendously blessed. There's so much to share with the world, and I think so. A censorship system revolts against that very Indian ethic of being different, diverse.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point, because we have only scratched the surface when it comes to India. Like, even in major cities in the US, I mean, now things are changing with more authentic food, but it was always butter naan and chicken butter masala for the longest time. Yeah. So yeah, we have.
Medium spicy. I know how it's done in the US.
Yeah, exactly. And then a mango lassi to top it off. So yeah, we have barely scratched the surface, and people are becoming more and more aware of how diverse and how much depth India has as a culture. So yeah, I mean, if the step is taken in the right
One,
direction,
one, one anecdote I'm very fond of sharing is that we have a thing called Chinjabi, where Chinese dishes have been localized in India to Punjabi cuisine. It's called Chinjabi, okay, and it's made by Tarla Dalal. She has a great cookbook, and we have things which are truly atrocious but really, really tasty, called American chop suey. So, like things like that, so India tries to adapt and apply for its own.
yeah, absolutely. Apar, I mean, I know we have just scratched the surface and there is so much to talk about. We could go on talking about internet shutdowns and all of that, but I want to quickly move to some of your endeavors. One of it is co-founding the digital rights organization Internet Freedom Foundation. And also save the internet.in and save our privacy.in. And before we end this podcast, I also want to know that someone who focuses so much on digital rights and internet privacy and all of that, you have a smart home and you have interconnected devices and all of that. Are you apprehensive? Does that make you uptight? And would love to know what made you transition into a smart home, because I know that my dad does not let me turn on Google Mini, thinking it's going to listen to us all the time. So yeah, let's start with your endeavors and then we'll move to the smart home and your thoughts about it.
Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna come out like a hypocrite, but it's okay. I'm gonna be honest about what I do and what I don't. The first thing is that, Bala, what we noticed after the Save the Internet movement ended was that online movements are really quick to start, scale up. But when you are trying to work on something which uh, challenges entrenched interests, they're going to always come back and want the same thing. And it has happened again. It's going to be under a different pretext, like deployment of 5G networks, etc., increased network costs, different economic realities. But the OTT consultation has again happened recently this year. Okay. So you need to take movements towards organizations, and organizations also in the sense that which can constantly work on that issue without alienating a community of core supporters. So, of course, those million people who wrote emails are not going to be there, but you have to retain the interest of 1,000, 2,000, continue engaging them. And this is why the Internet Freedom Foundation was founded. It's an advocacy group, it's not a research group, which works on the impact of technology on Indian society. And the funding model also accounts for that, in which we essentially try to do what the ACLU does in America, in which individuals give money, Indians only. And that's also because of the regulations in India. If we take foreign money, then we can't file court cases, we can't talk to lawmakers, we can't lobby regulatory bodies by setting up public campaigns. So all of our funding is Indian, except one UNESCO grant, which is exempted under regulations. All of that funding is transparently made available in terms of breakups of costs and expenses on a month-to-month basis. And that's not to signal virtue, it's to indicate that it's important for the community to know how much money you're making, where you're spending, how much do you need, okay? And that's the most important part. So they are a part of that. And we basically keep member briefing calls, etc., different types of that. So there's a huge community element. At the end of the year, we did last year a physical meetup in which we presented our plans for 2023. This is what we are going to do. This is how much money we need. Will you help us? It's like a GoFundMe, okay? And we filed about, during my time, I was first executive director. I left it in March this year. Then I was volunteering for about 6 months as a founder director without pay. And much more recently, I've even stopped that, is thinking that when I made the organizational development plan was that I would only work for 6 years, 2 terms of 3 years each. Okay, that's also because sometimes the founder becomes identifiable with the organization, and that can be a risk, as we've seen. And here's a joke, like with Sam Altman and OpenAI, sometimes the founder becomes more powerful than the board. Okay,
It is also
but
reality. The
it is
truth.
also reality. But here's the thing: in non-profits, especially, it's important that the founder is not identified with the organization, and I have a very clear view about that. Of course, there are pitfalls to that. The founder brings in an energy, focus, and degree of self-sacrifice, which is necessary to keep the ship going. And it does accrue more benefits on a longer term line. But it becomes much more dependent on that single person, their vision, their foresight, their interpersonal relationships, and their networks. And sometimes the founder starts rent seeking. Okay. So I thought that it's better if it's a public organization built from community values for people to come in and go out over a period of time, right? And I've written about this in my transition post as well. Now, Internet Freedom Foundation works on a wide charter of things, which are touch points of technology on Indian society, such as facial recognition, where we have made the Panoptic Tracker, which is a transparency project, but we also litigated in court. If there's no legal basis to a facial recognition system, which is used for policing, let's say in Hyderabad. So help an activist to file a case, the constitution challenge it. We've been in most litigations around digital rights in India, such as the internet shutdown in Jammu and Kashmir, internet shutdown in Rajasthan, internet shutdowns in West Bengal, website blocking. We've represented non-profits for free, which include Internet Archive, VLC Player, etc., etc. We got VLC Player unblocked. VLC Player's website was blocked in India, by the way. Okay, so there have been good positive outcomes from a lot of the work. We've drafted 2 private members' bills on privacy, filed by 2 different members of parliament from 2 different political parties on surveillance reform. We've participated in public consultations, etc., 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 etc. We've set up large literacy campaigns to make certain issues much more relatable and grown a community, at least in India's metropolitan elite, who uses Instagram to understand facial recognition. Programs such as DigiYatra, which are facial recognition systems for entry to airports, that it's not mandatory, you can opt out, these are the risks. So make an educated choice around it. During COVID, we ran literacy campaigns on India's contact tracing application called Arogya Setu, which led to changes in it. India's vaccination online portal called CoWIN, which was only in English, didn't have a privacy policy and required a CAPTCHA, thereby only privileging able-bodied people who understood English to get vaccinated between the 18 to 38 age group. We got that changed to being multilingual, having a privacy policy, and being much more accessible for people with disabilities. So we've done a lot of work in these 6 years. I'll invite people to look at the IFF YouTube channel, etc. Where
That is remarkable how much you have been able to cover. That, yeah, wow.
So we've been an advocacy organization. Actually, our thinking has been that you need to match the power of an ongoing public conversation with your expertise. And it comes from not only frameworks of law and institutional engagement, but because we are from a movement, save the internet, but building citizen interest, ensuring then there's media coverage, making literacy explainers, yet at the same time engaging with a institutional body like a court, member of parliament or a lawmaker, a government ministry, etc. So having a clear charter of demands and also a reasonable path forward, and then matching both the power of a public movement with the knowledge of institutional engagement. That's been the core at that thinking. And India doesn't have that, unfortunately. In many domains, but it does have it, let's say, tied to much more identity-based campaigns around caste, around gender, or it has it around, let's say, specific issues which have been historic, like environment. Okay, so we have learned from that. A lot has been covered, and my colleagues at IFF continue doing wonderful work.
Fantastic. And now to talk about the second part of hypocrisy, quote unquote
So,
hypocrisy.
okay. So, I do click on the terms of service without reading them. I am guilty. And I do have a smartphone, home, in the sense that there are smart devices in different parts of my home, because I think it's added to a higher degree of functionality for me in terms of setting alarms, reminders, things like that. But I do make certain choices. For instance, I do use a different email if I'm talking to activists. I do have certain data archival practices, data removal practices, disappearing messages, using Signal, but also using WhatsApp. Okay, so I think I am a I have some guilt towards how much I enjoy the delight a new technology provides me, but I crib about it like a lot of you.
Mm.
And the way I try to rationalize it, Bala, is that, well, I exist in a broken system, and my objective is to keep myself honest as much as I can, and also only take as much burden as I can. I don't think that by using a smart device by itself, you are being virtuous, or you are being like honest to the kind of work you do. I think the honesty comes through when you say that a smart device as it exists today should exist in a different way, because the objective of my work is not to question the very basis of technology. Of course, technology changes and reorders things a lot, but is to think about it a little much more deeply in terms of where is the uh, where is the alignment in terms of constitutional values which are possible.
Mm.
So that's there. And just to indicate, I have not gone crazy. I do use one or two devices, but then again, I use it very mindfully. And I try to separate my data across different domains. Also, what I've started using much more recently have been AI-based technologies. So, and here again, there's another model conundrum which I face. And possibly I don't have the answers for this. I'm still thinking this through. If any listeners do have a better sense about it, let me know.
Yeah.
So AI-based technologies quite often have been built on large language models scraping off the internet, and and to improve that model, possibly they need a constant system of data gathering, which is also a system of surveillance, right? So, but at its root, it gives you a high amount of delight, right? So, for instance, there are ethical practices which you can do. It can recreate the past a little differently. You can essentially uh, improve your productivity by spitballing. I use it sometimes with the AI. Okay, if I'm stuck, I'm like typing back at it, and it's typing and it's giving me something. Okay, so it's a soundboard in some sense. I use it for my YouTube videos in some way, right? For auto transcription, things like that, for color correction, things like that. So, and also, yeah, advanced features, for instance, in terms of, if I'm looking down at a page and I'm looking down for 2 minutes, because it's really tough if people think it's easy to look in the camera and speak for even 2 minutes, even for a lawyer who's done a lot of public speaking, to do eye correction, right? So these are all AI-based features. So I do feel conflicted about it a little bit, but I think technologies by themselves, it's not like we can do without them, and we should be open to trying them out. In fact, I try out most technologies. I always test them out. I've used TikTok. I've used all of them. It's just that I feel that sometimes the underlying premise, etc., that's not great. The thinking around it is not great.
Yeah. And I think as a technology enthusiast and having been exposed to all of these things from a much earlier age also lets you be aware of the pros and cons and use them judiciously, like you mentioned about Signal and having, using a different email to talk to activists and so on. Apart, you mentioned about, I mean, it just struck me as a lawyer who does public speaking. And I've been talking to you for about an hour and a half, and it was probably one of my most fluent conversations. And what is surprising is that you mentioned in one of your interviews that you had a stammer problem growing up.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that motivated you to practice public speaking. So, would love to, before we end this podcast, would love to know that story as well.
So what happens is that if you are in a nurturing environment, and I think a lot of people who much more are young parents or themselves, if you're in a nurturing environment where you are encouraged to do better and there's a high amount of belief which is placed in you, you do end up manifesting that. I'm a great believer that if you over a period of time, of course, you can't help everyone and you can't uh, do it. So, but especially for family members, close friends, if you believe the better out of them and you help them, you signify it. So that happened with me. And what my parents did was that I said that I have a stammer in public speaking. How should I get over it? I like to write, I like to read. And I don't know, I read somewhere or self-help guide, and possibly this is why YouTube is also so great for young people, and they think that it helps them, that you need to speak in front of a mirror for about 2 to 3 minutes. And what I ended up doing was just reading an op-ed in a newspaper or a news item, or throwing myself a question like, like for instance, that how should a city control its air pollution, and trying to talk about it intelligently for 2 to 3 minutes, and trying to do it again and again and again and again and again and again. And over a period of time, it compounded. That I I do have chats with friends even today, and they say that Apar, you're able to do this, and it's a simplistic reduction for them to some of them to say it like, oh, you're a type A, etc. And maybe they're just being too kind. A lot of people are not able to do this, and I think again I'll just come back to it. The difference is not only who I am, it is the environment which I've been offered since childhood, and the comfort, the support which has come through, which is not there for many people. The facilities are not there. For instance, if my parents did not actually support me, let's say financially, in terms of getting a full length mirror, being able to stand in front of it and talk, um, and it was placed in the bathroom. So I remember I used to stand in front of the bathroom, and you have that sense of solitude. Nobody is watching you. And I start out like that, and I keep speaking, keep speaking, keep speaking, keep speaking. And when I talk in public, possibly they are friends, I can't remember, but they must have been, in which they basically say, you're going to do great, you're going to do well. Okay, oh, it didn't go that bad, you forgot your speech. And I have forgotten my speeches a lot of times, but it doesn't matter. Even today, I'll say, Bala, I've noticed that what things really matter to me in terms of how well I perform and the emotional satisfaction I have from any speaking engagement are two things: a certain degree of preparation, but not over preparation. It should be tied in with something I know. But the second is, much more importantly, 10 to 15 minutes before I deliver any kind of lecture, and I'm trying to lecture and give speeches more in Hindi now, is to have a sense of confidence, to have a good time, to meet the people there, to be in a good, uh, happy space. And usually, when I'm feeling like that, it ends up having a stronger emotional connection with the people who are in the audience. The quality of the conversation improves, which is also why before we started this podcast, I wanted to talk to you for 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. I didn't know this was a part of that, but
No,
excellent point,
it's not a
actually.
process. It's just who I am now.
No, I was just joking, but honestly, that's a good tip for anyone who wants to do public speaking, or just before entering a meeting, just to be in a good mental space. I think a little bit of informal chat or informal conversation definitely preps you up for a much more serious meeting. And what is fascinating about you, Apar, is that you are extremely humble about the fact that you had a very privileged upbringing, but at the same time you recognize the fact that you had such supportive parents who gave the best that they could, and made you who you are today, and you made the best out of your opportunities as well. And with zero amount of virtue signaling, you are doing great, and I'm so glad that you are doing what you're doing in terms of digital rights protection and privacy and all of that. I've been following your work very closely, and so I want to wish you all the very best for your YouTube channel and all the work that you would do go on. You have already had a very illustrious career, and you're pretty young for a lawyer. So all the very best on that front as well.
Thank you so much, Pala. It's been a pleasure to be on this podcast. And I'll link to it on my YouTube channel as well. I'm trying something new again. And I hope you are able to link to mine when you post this.
Absolutely, 100%. And I will link all your op-eds and your work in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much, Bala. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Have a good weekend ahead.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye bye.